What's up, everybody? Nate here, and the housing market bubble has finally burst in the United States. Prices and demand have been falling all throughout the country for the last few weeks now, and inventory has started to rise. Now, I've been talking about this a lot on this channel over the last couple of weeks, and it's definitely true. We are starting to see the housing market cool off because of interest rate hikes and a lot of inflation in the housing market. But right now, we are starting to see some pretty huge records that would even rival the 2007 housing market crash. Prices slowed down in June 2022 at their fastest rate in housing market history, and inventory exploded over the last few months and is now growing faster than we have seen in several years, all while homebuyer confidence is hitting a decade low. So with all of that being said, I want to talk about the housing market and give you an update on the three major things that are going on right now and what all of this is going to mean for the future of the market in general. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is home inventory. So in the housing market, we have basically a problem with equilibrium. That's why we've seen housing prices go crazy high over the last 2 years, because there has been a lot of demand, but there has definitely not been enough inventory. With the Federal Reserve lowering its benchmark interest rates to 0% and providing a ton of economic stimulus into our economy in 2020 and in 2021, a lot of people ended up going out and buying homes, a lot of them for the very first time. So we had an influx of brand new home buyers, and for a little while we had enough supply to meet demand, but eventually demand just kept going up, and inventory ended up going through the basement, no pun intended. But a lot has changed in the housing market since the turn of the year. The Federal Reserve has started to raise its benchmark interest rates. Now, what the Fed raising its interest rates means is a lot of Americans are going to be barred from getting a mortgage. Basically, it works like this. The federal government and the Federal Reserve prints all of the money, and then they distribute that money to the United States populace, first to businesses and banks. Banks are the ones that are going to give you your mortgage, and if it's really difficult for a bank to get their money because the Federal Reserve has raised its interest rates so high, then they're going to raise their interest rates too. The banks are going to be very particular on who they give loans to, and mortgage interest rates all throughout the United States have started to rise into the 5, 6, and 7% mark. That makes it a lot harder for Americans to get homes, but what we have started to see is prices do this weird balancing act of staying really high. And the reason that prices have stayed high in the United States is FOMO. A lot of Americans are still going out and buying homes, the ones that are able to, because they fear that this is the last time that they're going to be able to go out and get a home, so they have a fear of missing out. If they don't get a home right now, interest rates are just going to go up. That means there's going to be fewer homes on the market, which means prices are going to stay pretty high, and they are going to be barred from getting a mortgage and being able to afford a home. Right now in 2022, homes are pretty unaffordable. The most unaffordable they have been pretty much in American history. And that stems all from that demand, but you can't keep that demand up forever because the Federal Reserve is raising its interest rates. In March, they raised their interest rates by 0.25%, then again in May by 0.5%, in June by 0.75%, and well, we're gonna have to see what they do next during their next FOMC meeting in September. So the federal funds rate in the United States is around 2.25 to 2.5%, making it really difficult for banks to actually get the money that they need to create new mortgages for new home buyers. That means that demand is going way down, and when you have demand going down, people are still selling their houses, so inventory is now starting to rise. But there's something else really interesting going on in the housing market. Home builder confidence is going to a record low. We have a lot of home builders trying to create homes, but they're starting to realize that nobody is buying these homes. In June 2022, 15% of all new mortgage contracts, especially for brand new builds, fell through. So people that were trying to get a home realized that they couldn't afford it, or they backed out of that deal completely. That hurts a lot of our home builders and just people trying to sell their home, because we don't know who is going to go out and buy a home anymore. And that means that these homes are sitting on the market a whole lot longer, and the prices for the homes are starting to come down, all while inventory is going up. And like I said, the interesting situation is a lot of these home builders were creating homes, but nobody is now buying them. That was one of the solutions that they had in 2020 and in 2021 with the massive influx of people going to buy a home. They decided that they would start building new homes, and that's a great idea, except now people can't afford them. New listings in June 2022 actually spiked by 30%, and these are the most recent numbers that we have. All the while, demand for new homes and existing homes dropped to a 2-decade low. So people are not going out and getting homes because, one, mortgage interest rates are way too high. They simply can't afford them, so they are barred from getting a mortgage in general. And the second reason is because of inflation. Everything pretty much costs more right now because in June 2022, inflation hit an over 40-year high of 9.1%. That means that the average price of all goods and services went way up by 9.1%. So Americans are having a tough time just buying all of their necessary goods and services, let alone a brand new house. And a house is expensive. Like when I bought my first home, they expect you to have thousands upon thousands of dollars saved up. And that's just for your down payment. You've also got closing costs. And if you have an escrow, you need to put taxes and insurance into that before you can even buy the home. You're putting up literally tens of thousands of dollars right up front. And a lot of Americans simply cannot afford that right now. Especially since the median price for a home in the United States is now well over $400,000. It's spiked up significantly over the last 2 years because of all of this demand and really short supply. But luckily there is a light at the end of the tunnel for brand new home buyers. Home prices just set a new record, but in the opposite direction. They fell by around 10%, the fastest pullback we have seen in the housing market since 1970. Now, part of the reason for that is because we're starting to see a lot more homes get put on the market, because just like buyers have that FOMO, sellers also have the FOMO too. They believe that if they don't sell their house immediately or within the next few months, then they're not going to be able to get a really good deal for it because prices are starting to come down. They've been going up, but now sellers are starting to see the writing on the wall and they want to get their house sold. They don't want to take a loss on their house, which means selling it for less than what they paid for it, so they want to try to get it sold right now. Also, if people are looking to sell and they've been thinking about selling for maybe the past few months, well, they want to sell right now because if they don't get this house sold, there is going to be no demand in 2023 with interest rates going up. So this is their last chance, but those are the ones that are in a good enough situation to where they want to actually sell their home. There are some individuals in the United States right now that did not anticipate the full cost that it takes to get a home. We are starting to see foreclosures rise all throughout the country, and that is mostly due to inflation. I mentioned it before, but inflation is making everything more expensive. The people who got a house over the last 2 years, well, chances are when they got their house, they could afford it. The bank made sure that they could afford that mortgage, but now we're 2 years later and the bank doesn't know what's going on right now. They couldn't have anticipated layoffs and unemployment from businesses, and of course, inflation raging faster than it ever has. That is making a lot of Americans rethink their housing bill in general, and they're starting to put that on the back burner. And some of them are just selling their house and downsizing because they cannot afford the insurance or property taxes or just all of the maintenance that goes into owning a home. Wages have gone up a little bit with inflation in 2022, but our jobs market is not extremely strong in the United States. Yes, we have a lot of job growth, and of course, unemployment is at its lowest point in over 40 years, but also there's not a lot of jobs available, meaning that people who are getting new jobs are basically settling for lower benefits and lower pay because that's all there is. They're now trying to go in and get a home, or they already have a home, but they can't afford their bills as it is, and everything else around them is getting more expensive, like groceries and gas. They're going into foreclosure, or they're just flat out selling their home. And couple that with now all of these home builders that are trying to sell these brand new homes but can't because nobody can afford them. Now you have an inventory problem. That means that home buyers have a little bit more leeway on the homes that they can choose, so prices are going to go down in the United States. That's also really good news because we could start to see bidding wars decrease all throughout the country. So at the height of the pandemic, people were going to get a house, but there was multiple people bidding on one house because there just wasn't enough homes available for every person that wanted one. So there were bidding wars. People were buying homes for $25,000, $50,000, and $75,000 plus above asking, and that pushed the values of homes way up too. Now that there's so many houses on the market, people can pick and choose choose which home they want to buy and which home they want to bid on. So what exactly does this mean for the future of the housing market? Well, you got to remember, a lot of the booms that we've seen in the housing market over the last 2 years were largely artificial. The United States federal government really stepped in because of the pandemic, offering stimulus and forbearance on mortgages and rent and student loans and a whole slew of other things. So people had a ton of money. Not only that, but there was stimulus checks. And of course, there was the Federal Reserve lowering its benchmark interest rates to 0%. That created a lot of demand and everything basically went way up. Pretty much everything in the United States. But now all of that is gone. So the people who are left in the housing market, there are a few of them that simply can't remain. So they're going to have to sell their house. But at the same time, there's a lot of Americans who are trying to buy a home, but prices are still way too high. So right now it's kind of a really bad spot for home buyers and home sellers. The housing market is pretty stagnant right now, which means that prices are probably going to go down for the remainder of 2022, and we're going to see some reversal in the housing market. Also, inventory is probably going to go up as demand goes way down, and if we actually see a complete flip with the inventory going way higher than what demand is, well, then you could really start to see prices go way through the floor. They're not really creating enough homes right now because investors and these companies that build homes just don't really see the full profit from it and the full reasoning, because they're not going to be able to make all of their money back. Building a home is expensive, especially since we have supply chain issues and inflation. The Federal Reserve is also most likely going to continue to raise its interest rates aggressively for the rest of this year. They have a job of bringing down inflation, and one of the ways they do that is by raising their interest rates. That brings down demand for everything because, like I said, when interest rates are really high, it's harder for people to go out and borrow money. So that's going to mean that demand comes down even more and that people just keep putting their house on the market, but there are no buyers. But what it ultimately means is the housing market is going to go back to normal levels like we saw just before the 2020 pandemic. I don't think we're going to see an outright crash in the housing market because I don't think inventory is going to spike that much, and I think there's always going to be a little bit more demand than there is inventory in the housing market. That means you can't have a crash because for every house, there's just a little bit more demand. Not as much demand as we've seen over the last 2 years, because for every one house, there might have been 100 to 200 people that want it. Now it might be 5 or 10 people. What all of this does is allow supply to finally meet up with demand, so that won't cause a crash in the housing market. It's just going to cause a massive slowdown. Prices, I don't think, are going to go into the negative, but they're going to slow down significantly, and we probably aren't going to see much housing market growth in terms of prices over the next year or so. We might see 1 to maybe 5% at max, which is pretty normal. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about the housing market bubble finally bursting in the United States? Do you think it's too good to be true, or do you think that housing prices are eventually going to go way back up? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.